The servant girl sang while cleaning. The Alpha King stopped and listened from the door. The castle was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that comforted the soul. It was heavy, like a secret pressing against stone walls. Every corridor seemed to hold whispers of the past, of laughter that had long faded, of footsteps that had long gone. The torches flickered, casting uneven shadows, making the corridors seem alive with memories that no one dared speak of. In one of these long, echoing halls, a small figure moved. She was young, no more than 17, with hair the color of chestnuts and eyes that glimmered with quiet determination. Her hands were busy sweeping the marble floor, but her voice rose softly above the scrape of the broom. Her song was simple, almost fragile, yet it carried through the hall like sunlight through fog. Each note was filled with longing, hope, and something she did not yet name, a kind of courage that came not from power, but from the heart. Even in shadows, a song can shine, she whispered to herself, her voice catching for a moment before she continued. She was a servant in this castle, though servant felt like too small a word for someone who moved with such dignity, even in rags. She was invisible to most, passing through halls where nobles and knights walked with heads held high, yet she carried herself with a quiet strength that made her presence almost undeniable. The Alpha King of the castle was a man who rarely left his tower. The rumors about him were countless, that he was cruel, cold, unyielding, cursed by the gods, or perhaps by his own mistakes. No one dared approach him lightly, but tonight he stood at the door of the hall where the girl swept. He had paused without thought, as though drawn by a force he could not resist. The moment he heard her song, something inside him, something long buried beneath years of anger, isolation, and regret, stirred. His cloak brushed the floor, silent against the stone as he leaned against the doorframe, listening. For the first time in many years he felt the faintest warmth of emotion that was not fear, not suspicion, not duty, but something quieter, more fragile, like a candle flickering against a storm. The girl did not notice him. She did not even sense the shadow of a man who had ruled over all this land with iron and silence. She continued her song, swaying slightly as she cleaned her broom, gliding over the tiles, and yet every word she sang seemed to reach him directly, sinking into parts of him he had long thought dead. "What is this feeling?" he muttered to himself, almost startled by his own words. "I have not heard joy in so long." He stepped fully into the hall, though he moved carefully, quietly, like a predator unused to attention. The girl stopped mid-sweep, sensing a presence that was both terrifying and magnetic. Her eyes lifted, meeting his for the first time. The king's presence was overwhelming. Tall, dark, and formidable, with eyes that seemed to pierce through stone as easily as flesh, he was every story whispered about him. And yet, there was something more. Something that could not be captured in tales. There was a loneliness behind his gaze, a shadow that softened the edges of fear. "You sing," he said, his voice low, almost unfamiliar to himself. The girl's hands froze on the broom. She had been caught, not by a noble or a guard, but by the Alpha King himself, the man whose name carried both reverence and terror. She swallowed, unsure if her courage was enough to keep her from trembling. I sing," she replied softly. "It helps pass the time, and," she hesitated, unsure if she should continue, "and it keeps the shadows away." He studied her, leaning slightly against the doorframe as though the weight of his own life pressed him into this moment. The shadows of the hall seemed to retreat from him, yet they lingered behind her, clinging to the edges of the light that her voice created. "Why do you sing here?" "Alone?" he asked. "Because no one listens," she answered honestly, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "And yet, I hope someone does, even if it's only the walls." Her words struck him like a quiet storm. No one had spoken to him like that in years. No one had dared hope that he might listen, might care, might understand. And yet, here was a girl, small and unassuming, whose courage was not measured by swords or titles, but by something far stronger, the willingness to face the darkness with her own light. He stepped closer, the floor groaning softly under his boots, and the girl instinctively took a small step back, instinct and fear dancing together. Yet she did not flee. She could not. Something in her heart, something stubborn and pure, told her to stay, to sing, to see where this moment might lead. "Your voice," he said, his voice almost a whisper now, as if afraid to disturb the fragile light it carried. It has strength, and yet, it is not strength I am used to." The girl tilted her head, curious but cautious. "I do not know much," she said, "but I know that songs and hope can be stronger than fear." For the first time in many years, he felt a tension in his chest that was not anger, not control, not command. It was longing. And with that longing came a question he had never dared to ask aloud. Could this girl change me? The silence stretched between them, heavy yet electric, until the distant echo of a bell from the far tower reminded them both of the night's ongoing demands. The king turned slightly, as if recalling the weight of the world he carried on his shoulders, and then back to the girl. "You will sing again," he said, more like a promise than an order. The girl's lips parted, uncertain if she had heard correctly. I will if you wish," she said softly, almost afraid of her own bravery. "Yes," he said, the word simple but commanding. "I wish it." And with that, he retreated to the shadows of the doorway, leaving her to finish her work. But the moment lingered, like a note that refused to fade. The hall felt different now, less cold, less empty, as though the castle itself had noticed the shift in the balance of darkness and light. The girl resumed sweeping, but her steps were lighter, her song brighter. Something had changed, though neither of them could name it yet. The song no longer felt like a simple melody. It felt like a bridge, a fragile connection between two souls from entirely different worlds. Outside the hall, the wind whispered against the castle walls, carrying rumors of the past and hints of the future. Somewhere in the distant forests, shadows moved, and eyes watched. But for now, the Alpha King remained in the doorway, silent, listening, and for the first time in a long time, feeling something other than solitude. She finished cleaning and turned toward the great doors, intending to leave, but the king stepped forward, his movement fluid, like water shaped by unseen currents. "Do you fear me?" he asked, his voice low, almost hesitant, betraying the vulnerability he rarely showed. The girl met his gaze directly. "No," she said after a moment. "Not yet. I only fear what might happen if I stop hoping." A strange sensation gripped him then. Fear mixed with awe, anger mixed with admiration, darkness mixed with light. He had not known that such a small, simple thing, a song, could unravel him so completely. He began, unsure of the words his heart demanded. You are different from all I have known. And you are different from all I have feared," she said softly, tilting her head, curiosity and courage shining in her eyes. The moment stretched between them, fragile yet unbreakable, until the echo of distant footsteps reminded them both that the castle's world did not wait for moments of quiet revelation. The king's presence faded once more into the shadows, leaving the girl standing alone. But she no longer felt invisible. Somewhere deep inside the castle, a candle flickered, unnoticed, and the shadows seemed to bow slightly, acknowledging the birth of something new, something fragile and yet full of promise. And as the girl stepped down the corridor, her song rising once more, the Alpha King's gaze followed her, lingering, torn between the walls of duty, the chains of his curse, and a sudden terrifying hope that perhaps, just perhaps, the song could reach him fully, before the darkness reclaimed him. The castle seemed to sigh as dawn broke over the distant hills, the first rays of light cutting through the tall, narrow windows. Yet even with sunlight, the halls were cold and silent, heavy with memories and the unspoken rules of its master. The servant girl moved quietly, carrying a basket of laundry down the winding corridors. Her hands were steady, her steps careful, but her mind was still caught on the man she had seen the night before. The Alpha King himself, She did not speak of it to anyone. No one in the castle would believe her, and if they did, the consequences could be dire. The king's name was whispered with fear, his presence both admired and dreaded. Yet despite that, she felt something unfamiliar when she thought of him, a strange curiosity that mingled with a quiet hope. In the high tower, the Alpha King stood by a window, his dark eyes following her movements even from afar. He had watched her since the night she had sung. Every gesture, every soft hum, every small act of care in the castle's service drew his attention. It was not just her voice that had captured him. It was her courage to be gentle in a place ruled by fear. He remembered the way her eyes met his, unafraid. Most would bow, avert their gaze, or tremble. But she had looked at him like he was only human, not a shadow draped in power and curse. That small act had struck him deeper than any sword could. As he observed her, the servants whispered of a strange presence in the hallways. Some felt it as unease, others as hope, though none dared say so aloud. The girl herself sensed it sometimes, a weight that pressed in from corners, a pair of unseen eyes tracking her movements. Yet she did not flee. Somehow, she felt that this presence was not meant to harm her, though she could not explain why. Days passed, and a routine formed. She would sing softly while cleaning, sometimes in the halls, sometimes in the kitchens. He would watch, quietly, from shadows or doorways, never intervening unless necessary. Slowly a rhythm developed between them, one of distance, yet growing awareness, an unspoken conversation that needed no words. But peace is fragile in a castle of power. One evening a cold wind blew through the outer walls, carrying a scent that made the king's muscles tighten. The shadows in the hall shifted unnaturally, curling as if alive. "They are coming," he whispered to himself. The girl was unaware of the danger creeping closer, tending to the long line of stone steps with her broom. She hummed a tune this time, a melody that was lighter, almost playful, yet it carried strength in its simplicity. The king stepped into the hall silently, moving closer to her. His shadow stretched long and dark against the polished floor, yet she did not notice until he cleared his throat softly. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his tone gentle but urgent. She froze, her eyes wide, searching his face for the meaning of his question.
"Hear what? The shadows," he said.
"Something stirs beyond these walls. You are not safe outside your duties." Not anymore. Her heart quickened. Though she had grown up hearing tales of danger in faraway lands, and though the castle itself was full of whispers, she had never truly faced fear like this before. And yet, strangely, she did not feel panic. The king's presence grounded her, gave her a courage she did not fully understand. "What should I do?" she asked softly. "Stay close," he said. "Do exactly as I say, and nothing will harm you." Together they moved through the corridors, the castle's ancient stones seeming to hum beneath their feet. Every shadow could have been a threat, every corner a hiding place for enemies unseen. Yet the girl did not falter. She clutched her basket tightly, her song now silent, replaced by a quiet awareness of the world beyond her simple chores. As they reached the highest tower, the king turned to her. "You are brave," he said. "I see it now clearer than I ever have. Most fear power. You do not." She looked down at him, startled. "I do fear, my lord. But I also believe that fear can be faced, if one knows what is worth protecting." His eyes softened, but only for a moment. "And what is worth protecting for you?" he asked, almost unconsciously. "My home," she replied simply. "My family." And she hesitated. "Those who cannot defend themselves." He felt a strange heat in his chest, a mixture of admiration and longing. She was not naive. She knew danger, but she chose courage anyway. That choice, it was rare, almost unheard of in his world. "Tomorrow you will face something different," he said quietly. "I cannot say what it will bring, but you must be ready." Her brow furrowed. "I will do what I must, my lord, but I do not understand why you trust me." He did not answer immediately. Trust was not a word he used lightly. For years, he had built walls around his heart, around his life, to protect both himself and those who dared enter his castle. Few had ever passed those walls, and fewer still had left him wanting to lower them. "You sing in the darkness," he finally said, "even when no one listens. That is trust. That is strength." She did not fully understand, but she nodded, sensing the weight behind his words. That night, the castle was restless. Outside the walls, a group of shadowed figures moved, their forms blending with the trees. They whispered curses and threats, remnants of a darkness long ago banished from the kingdom, but never destroyed. The king paced in the highest tower, listening to the wind, listening to the faint melody of the girl's song drifting from the hall below. "She is the light," he said to no one but the night, "and yet she cannot know what waits beyond these walls." As the first hour of the night passed, the girl's curiosity overcame her caution. She had seen the king watching her, silently protecting her in ways she did not fully understand. Tonight she wanted to see him more clearly, to understand the man who seemed both terrifying and compelling. She moved quietly, her feet soundless against the stone, toward the hall where she had first sung. There she glimpsed him, not hidden in shadow this time, but standing in the flickering torchlight, watching her. "You followed me," she said, not as a question, but as an observation. "I need to see," he replied simply. "I need to know that you are safe." Her heart fluttered at the concern in his voice. Most of the castle's inhabitants would not notice her at all. Some might mock her, or use her, or even fear her. Yet this man, the Alpha King himself, was concerned. And that concern, though silent and stoic, felt like warmth. "Why do you care?" she asked, almost a whisper. He hesitated. "Because I have not felt hope in many years." "And you bring it." The girl's eyes widened. She had never thought of herself as significant, never imagined that a simple song could stir something so deep in the king's heart, and yet here he was, admitting that her presence mattered. Before she could respond, a distant crash echoed through the castle walls. Dust and small stones fell from the ceiling, and a chill swept through the hall. The king's hand went instinctively to the hilt of his sword. "They are here," he said, his voice low but firm. "The shadows we feared have returned." The girl froze, but this time she did not tremble. She felt a strange calm, standing near the man who had been watching her, protecting her, guiding her. She realized that her fear could be faced, not ignored, not denied, but faced, because she was not alone. Together they moved through the corridors, preparing for whatever threat had come. The castle itself seemed to sense the danger, its stones whispering warnings, its shadows twisting unnaturally. The girl clutched her broom as if it were a weapon, her heart pounding. Yet she felt a strange clarity. "You must stay close," the king said again. "Do not wander. Do not act alone. Whatever comes, we face it together." "I understand," she said, her voice steady though her hands were tight around the broom. The wind outside howled, carrying the scent of darkness and the rustle of approaching figures. But inside, the two of them moved through the halls like light and shadow, one drawing strength from the other. And then, from the distant tower, a shadow fell across the castle's highest windows, larger than any man, moving with deliberate menace. The king's eyes narrowed, his body tensing. The girl's breath caught, and for a moment, silence filled the hall. "You will see things tonight that will challenge your courage," the king said, his voice almost a growl. "But remember, light can exist even in darkness. Do not forget your song." The girl nodded, understanding more than the words themselves. Her song was more than melody. It was hope, defiance, and courage. And if the king's heart could be moved by it, perhaps it could move the shadows too. The castle had never been truly quiet since that night. Even when the bells were silent and the torches flickered low, the walls seemed to hum with whispers of what had come and what was coming. Shadows clung to corners and corridors, restless, as if they knew something was changing. The servant girl moved carefully through the halls, her steps light but purposeful. She had spent her days tending to chores, sweeping, washing, and singing to fill the emptiness of the castle. But the recent nights had changed her world. She knew now that the Alpha King watched over her, not always close, not always visible, but always present. That presence was both comforting and terrifying. She had glimpsed the darkness in his eyes, the weight he carried, and yet she also saw sparks of something no one else had ever seen. A longing, a hesitation, a vulnerability that whispered of a heart buried under years of solitude. He found her that evening in the kitchens where she had been scrubbing the cold stone floor. The scent of herbs and old stone mixed with the fading sunlight streaming through the high windows. The king's figure loomed behind her, silent as a shadow. "You are here again," she said softly, not turning to look. She did not tremble as she had the first time, but her voice carried a cautious respect. "I am here," he replied, his tone calm yet heavy. "I need to see for myself that you are unharmed, that you continue as you always do." She paused, letting the cloth in her hand rest against the stone. I am fine, my lord. Though the castle feels different these nights. I think it is the shadows, or perhaps the wind carries whispers." He stepped closer, and for the first time she noticed the faint lines of worry etched across his face, the way his eyes flickered with unease. "The shadows are not idle," he said. "They move with purpose, and some come from far beyond these walls. You may be in danger without knowing it." Her heart beat faster, yet she did not flinch. I trust you," she said, "and if you stand with me, I will not falter." He did not answer immediately. Trust was not a simple word, and he had rarely spoken it aloud. Years of rulership, of loss, of solitude, had made him cautious of those who dared enter his life. And yet he could not deny the truth. This girl, small and seemingly fragile, had stirred something in him that he thought lost forever. "You sing in the darkness," he said quietly, "even when no one listens. That is courage. That is hope. And it has a power I had forgotten existed." She turned to meet his gaze. There was a faint blush on her cheeks, though she could not explain why. "Songs are small, my lord, but if they remind someone that light exists, then they are not so small." For a moment, silence fell between them, a calm in the middle of the castle's restless shadows. Then a sudden crash echoed from the far corridors, followed by a low, menacing growl. The king's body tensed instinctively. "They are here," he said, voice firm now. "The shadows that move beyond these walls, they have come for us." The girl's heart leapt, but she did not panic. She had felt danger before, had faced small fears in her daily life. Yet this was unlike anything she had known. She looked at him, her eyes steady, and saw not a king cloaked in power, but a man ready to defend what he cared for, ready to face what others feared. "Then we face them together," she said, her voice unwavering. The king regarded her for a long moment, and then nodded.
Yes!
Together. They moved quickly through the corridors, the sound of distant footsteps and whispers echoing through the stone halls. The girl held her broom tightly, more out of instinct than expectation of its use. The king's hand rested briefly on her shoulder, steadying, guiding. It was a simple touch, but it carried reassurance that no words could match. As they reached the tower where the shadows seemed thickest, the king paused. "Wait," he said. "Do you know why you were able to face fear so calmly tonight?" She looked at him, puzzled. "Because I have no choice. Because I must be brave." He shook his head slowly. "Because you carry something inside you that even darkness cannot touch. Hope, courage, light. You are rare." The girl felt warmth in her chest. She had never heard such praise from anyone, least of all the man whose name carried both reverence and fear across the kingdom. "I do not feel rare," she said softly. "I only feel I must do what is right." "That is what makes you rare," he said, his voice almost a whisper. Not your station, not your strength, but your heart. They continued upward, toward the top of the tower, where the shadows were thickest and the wind howled like a living creature. And then as they reached the highest windows, the full presence of the threat became visible. Dark figures moved in the forest beyond the walls, twisted and unnatural, eyes glinting with malice. The king's body stiffened. "The curse. It is stronger than I feared," he muttered. "And it will not stop at the walls." The girl's fingers tightened around the broom. "Then we must face it," she said. Together. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time the walls around his heart trembled. No one had ever spoken to him like this. Not as a king, not as a master, not as a man. And yet, in her words, in her bravery, he felt a spark of something he had long denied. Connection. He stepped closer, his voice low and uncertain. "Do you understand the danger you face? If anything happens to you?" "I understand," she said firmly, "and I still choose to stand." There was a long silence, broken only by the whisper of wind through the high windows. The shadows outside shifted, as if aware of the bond growing between them, as if sensing that the light of her courage threatened their power. The king drew a deep breath. "Then we prepare," he said, "and when the shadows strike, you will not face them alone. I will stand with you." For the first time the girl saw a flash of something more than power in his eyes, something human, fragile, and achingly real. She had glimpsed it before in fleeting moments, but now it was undeniable. This man, the Alpha King, carried his own burdens, his own fears, yet he chose to protect her even at risk to himself. As night fell, the castle became a fortress of flickering torchlight and shifting shadows. The girl moved from hall to hall, checking doors and windows, her song silent but her courage loud in her heart. The king followed, silent as a shadow, yet always close, always protective. In a hidden chamber, the king revealed a fragment of his past. "Many years ago," he said quietly, "I made mistakes, choices that caused pain. The curse that haunts this castle, it is my doing in part. I cannot undo it, but I can try to protect what remains." The girl listened, understanding more than he realized. Her own life had been marked by hardships, by exile, by small daily struggles that built courage in quiet moments. She understood the weight of responsibility, the burden of mistakes, and the desire to make right what was broken. "You are not alone in your mistakes," she said softly. "And you are not alone in this. I will stand with you." His eyes met hers, and for a heartbeat the walls of the castle seemed to hold their breath. The shadows paused, as if considering the bond forming in their midst. "Your courage, it amazes me," he whispered.
You sing in darkness, yet you face fear. You see light even when shadows grow.
"And you," she said quietly, "protect even when you feel powerless. You have more light than you know, my lord."
He looked away for a moment, the weight of his past pressing upon him. I fear that my light is not enough," he said. "That the darkness will take everything I try to protect." She stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "Then let us share the light," she said. "Together it will be stronger than any darkness." He felt a warmth spread through him, unfamiliar and fragile, yet powerful. The bond between them was growing, not through words alone, but through shared courage, understanding, and unspoken trust. The castle seemed to respond, the stones glowing faintly with the energy of their resolve. Outside, the shadows paused, sensing a force they had not expected: unity, hope, and the courage to face what was coming. The castle shivered under the weight of the storm. Rain lashed against the stone walls, and the wind howled like a chorus of unseen spirits. Shadows twisted unnaturally in the flickering torchlight, as if testing the limits of the walls that had stood for centuries. Within, the Alpha King moved like a shadow himself, silent, alert, and tense. The servant girl followed close behind, her heart pounding, yet her steps steady. Her song had stopped hours ago. The danger left no room for melody. But the courage she had carried through her chores and quiet days had not left her. If anything, it had grown sharper, brighter, and more necessary than ever. "They are stronger than I expected," the king muttered, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the hallways. "The curse, it stirs with more force tonight, and it will not wait for us to be ready." The girl felt a chill, yet she did not falter. "Then we face it together," she said quietly, repeating the words she had spoken before. Her voice, though small, carried a weight she did not fully understand. He glanced at her, noting the resolve in her eyes. There was no fear in her stance, only determination, and in that determination he felt a stirring deep within himself, a mix of admiration, longing, and something he had not named for years. Hope. The first shadow struck at the northern gates. Its form was grotesque and shifting, moving with unnatural speed. Guards tried to hold it, but even their strongest swords could not pierce the dark aura surrounding it. "Stay behind me," the king commanded, drawing his sword. His cloak whipped behind him as he moved forward, meeting the shadow with practiced precision. The hall echoed with the clash of steel and the low, rumbling growls of the cursed beings. The girl gripped her broom tighter, yet she did not run. Instead, she moved quietly to the side, eyes fixed on the battle, searching for weaknesses, seeking a way to help. The king fought with a skill that was both terrifying and beautiful. Every movement measured, controlled, yet fueled by the urgency of protecting what he cared for. A second shadow appeared, more aggressive, aiming directly for the girl. Before it could reach her, the king lunged, his sword striking true. The dark form hissed and recoiled, then vanished into the shadows with a shriek that echoed through the castle. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low, almost a growl as he turned to her. "I am fine," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "You saved me." He studied her, noting the faint tremor in her hands, the way her chest rose and fell with rapid breaths. "You have courage beyond reason," he said softly. "And yet you are not reckless. That balance, it is rare." The girl nodded, though she did not fully understand the meaning. She only knew that in this moment, standing in the midst of chaos, she had chosen to be brave. And for some reason that choice mattered, not just to her, but to him. The shadows continued their assault, moving through corridors, walls, and floors, as if the castle itself were no barrier to their wrath. But with every strike, every careful defense, the king and the girl became more attuned to each other. She learned his patterns, anticipating his movements, knowing when to step aside or stay close. He learned hers, sensing her courage, feeling a strange, protective warmth bloom in his chest. Hours passed. The storm outside raged on, and the battle within the castle showed no sign of letting up. And then, in the deepest hour of night, the king paused, lowering his sword. His eyes darkened with a memory of long-buried pain. "I cannot let this continue," he whispered, almost to himself. "The curse, it feeds on my fear, on my mistakes. If I do not face it fully, it will consume everything." The girl stepped closer, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. "Then face it," she said softly, "and do not do it alone. I will stand with you." He looked down at her, the weight of his burdens pressing against him, yet softened by her presence. "You cannot know the danger," he said. "Even standing with me, it may be more than you can bear." "I can bear more than you think," she said, "because I believe in you, and because I believe that light can overcome darkness." For a moment he felt the walls around his heart tremble. He had ruled with fear and power for years, guarding his soul against everything that could harm him. Yet now, in the quiet courage of a single girl, he saw a path he had almost forgotten existed. Trust, hope, and the possibility of redemption. The largest shadow yet approached, moving through the great hall with deliberate menace. Its presence was suffocating, a dark cloud that pressed against the walls, against the torches, against their very hearts. The king squared his shoulders and held his sword high, but he knew brute force alone would not win this battle. "Your song," he he said suddenly, turning to the girl. Sing. Not for yourself, not for me, but for the castle, for the light that still lives here. The girl hesitated, fear and courage clashing within her. Then, with a deep breath, she began. Her voice rose, clear and steady, cutting through the chaos like sunlight piercing storm clouds. The shadows recoiled, twisting and shrieking as if her song wounded them. The king's eyes widened. The melody was simple, yet powerful, filled with hope, strength, and the courage of someone who refused to yield. He fought beside her, each strike of his sword synchronized with the rise and fall of her song. The largest shadow faltered, howling in fury, unable to withstand the light of her courage. The king felt a strange warmth in his chest, a fire fueled not by anger but by hope. Together, they pressed forward. The song strengthened, and the shadows began to break apart, retreating into corners, fading into the darkness from which they had come. The king's movements became sharper, more controlled, guided by the rhythm of her voice. When the final shadow vanished, leaving only silence and the faint smell of rain-soaked stone, the girl collapsed to her knees, exhausted but triumphant. The king knelt beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "You were magnificent," he said softly, his voice filled with awe. "You faced what most would flee from. Your courage, your song, had saved us all." She looked up at him, her chest still heaving, and managed a tired smile. "We saved each other," she said. He nodded, though he did not look away from the distant horizon. "The curse is not gone. It will return, stronger, more cunning. This victory is temporary." The girl's eyes softened. "Then we prepare, together." He studied her, seeing not just bravery, but understanding, empathy, and an unwavering light in her heart. It was rare, almost unimaginable, to find such strength in someone so seemingly ordinary. And yet, here she was, standing beside him, unafraid, unyielding. "You have changed something in me," he admitted quietly. "Something I thought was lost forever. I feel hope." Her hand found his, a gesture of trust and connection. "And I feel that even in darkness, light can guide us." The king looked down at her, his heart caught between the weight of his curse and the fragile hope she carried. If this trust is strong enough, perhaps we can face what comes next," he said. Outside, the storm began to ease, leaving the castle drenched but alive. The torches flickered against the damp walls, casting long, wavering shadows that no longer seemed threatening. Inside, the king and the girl sat together, sharing a quiet moment of reprieve. "I have lived so long in solitude," he whispered, almost to himself. "I had forgotten what it felt like to trust, to hope, to believe in something beyond fear." "You are not alone," she said softly, "and you do not have to be. Not while I stand with you." For a moment the castle seemed to breathe with them, its stones resonating with their quiet triumph, yet both knew that the night had been only a prelude. The curse, the shadows, and the dangers that had been stirred would return. And when they did, both the king and the girl would need more than courage. They would need the trust and bond they had begun to forge in the heart of darkness.